Hi guys, I am Alex and you are on Virrcraft channel. Today we will be painting an army. Of course not a massive Warhammer army, perhaps we will get to that someday, but the goal this time is to paint a few figures, and if not an army, then at least a squad. So they should have a similar form, some common elements, and all of them should look alike, but at the same time have differences that emphasize uniqueness. So let's not waste time and get straight to it. It's actually a quite engaging activity. I've learned from my own mistakes, despite having a general understanding of the series and watching several tutorials on how to paint armies. So let's try to break down the stages of painting an army into several steps and understand everything in order. I'll try to divide everything by steps. And step 0. Step 0 is the selection of miniatures to be used for painting. It's obvious, but still. For sure, it's a matter of taste and preference. Everyone can choose something suitable for themselves. I settled on fantastic, in my opinion, release from Miniatures Blueprint and Female Knight Army. I chose 5 figures that I liked the most. Entire release contains a few more models, but I decided to skip them for some reason. Each of the miniature illustrate its character with differences in both visual and character aspects. For me, they are looking like a female paladin army, something like that, so it is more than fine. And from that point, I should say step 0 is done. Moving to the next one, step 1. So the next, it is essential to choose a color schema. Find references or visualize how our army will look. I recommend using a search for similar images on the internet or employing the help of neural networks. For example, I asked DALL-E, I hope I pronounced it right, to generate an image of paladin figure in the color schema I want. After a few attempts, I got a pretty decent result. So I had in mind how my army should look, and now I have generated reference, so it's certainly helpful. Also for step 1 we will include the choice of paints we will use. Since I'm still a beginner, I'll try to using my armypainter speed paint and later add some layering with Vallejo acrylic paints. I will paint extra details or correct some mistakes using acrylics. And there will be mistakes. I was sure of that and I was not wrong. The main technique, let's say, will be a method called slap chop. Not entirely its canonic version, I should say, but it wouldn't be accurate to say that I only use layering or glazing. Before we dive into step 2 of the painting process, I'd like to kindly ask you to consider subscribing to my channel. Your support means a lot, and it will keep you updated on all the latest content. Thank you in advance for being a part of our community. So, step 2. Painting. I'll skip the part where the miniature was printed and primed, considering that this is a part of the preparation and not included in our steps. I believe you will agree with me that without prepared miniatures, it's a bit challenging to make a video about painting them, right? Similar to before, start with lighter tones and try not to overlap areas that will be white. The convenience of painting an army is that you can apply a layer or several to one miniature, and while it dries, you can work on another, saving time. This helps maintain consistency across all figures. Based on my experience, I suggest choosing elements that are similar on all your figures and painting them one by one. This way, progress is visible immediately and there is no need to wash or change brushes and paint. Also, if you're creating a color mix, it's doubly beneficial. You won't need to remember which color was used where later. But still, an advice here, if you are making some color mixes, it is better to keep separate notes. You never know when you might need to adjust something, and finding the right color again can be quite a challenge. In case if you plan to cover adjacent areas with a very dark or saturated paint that will override the original color, you can save some time at this stage and not worry about going beyond the limits of a particular part of the miniatures. But in general, try not to go beyond the boundaries of what you're painting, or at least minimize it. If we slightly expedite the process overall, it can be condensed into a few stages: light colors, dark colors, error corrections. And this will be a step 3. Error correction. Any areas you missed, accidentally covered with the wrong color or applied too much paint, resulting in a messy appearance, are addressed in step 3. In some cases, it is advisable to cover the miniature with the varnish to make corrections easier. This is particularly necessary for the first version of speed paint. This paint can be reactivated with acrylic, and covering them with white, for example, paint likely won't help. However, this step is only necessary for significant errors. And also, alternatively, you might have to cover everything in multiple layers. The choice is yours. This time I tried multiple layers, but next time I'll experiment with the varnish method. Once the errors are corrected, you can move on to the almost final stage. Let's call it step 4. Editing details and weather effects. For adding details, I consider metallic parts. If you are using metallic paints, silver, gold or others, rather than non-metallic method technique, I recommend using dry brushing, especially for silver parts. Elements like armor look great when they are painted with base color and later covered with silver, for example. It looks more natural and the true metallic method works even better. For gold it might work too, especially for large parts, but in my case I use dry brushing for silver parts and simply layered the golden parts. Here is the great tip for you: do not repeat my mistakes. Before adding effects and details in step 4, it might make sense to first cover metallic elements with paint and later fix errors, our previous step 3. Especially during dry brushing, it's easy to accidentally cover non-metallic areas with the metallic paint. It depends on your skill and density of previous errors, but examine step 3 and 4 and decide in which order it's better to paint your army in your case. Alright, we dealt with metal, errors and everything else. The final touch will be adding weather effects. Since this army has been in several battles, they saw some things, let's say. I saw that pristine white caves might not suit, and it was adding some dirty details. No, not those you are thinking about. I'm talking about weather effects and weather dirty details, so it depends on your personal preference, but still. Initially I tried to use piece of sponge, but due to the small size of figures I returned back to dry brushing. From my point of view it works much better on figures of this scale. One more advantage of weather effects is that they help bring the previous stages together, smooth our imperfections and give the figures their final look. I also decided to leave the eyes simply glowing, as it's showing the spiritual power of Virr of Paladins, if I might say it like that. Perhaps later I'll adjust this, but for now it seems to look quite good, at least from my point of view. The final optional step could be coating the figures with varnish. Since I plan to use these figures in our Dungeons and Dragons games, it's essentially to protect the paints and figures from fingerprints. For this I used the made spray from armypainter. So let's do the final review of what we achieved in the end. Let's go.